Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Welcome to this episode of Academic Writing Amplified. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak. Today's episode is titled, There Are No Bad Habits. I can't wait to get into this one with you because it's completely inspired by coaching that I've been doing lately as we've been running new clients through our Navigate Your Writing Roadmap program. If you want to get on the wait list for our next cohort of Navigate, we are actually going to be running our cohort a little earlier than we originally planned. We were going to start in September, but we decided to start mid-August so that our 12-week program fits perfectly between our start date and the Thanksgiving holiday. So if you are interested in our next round of Navigate, please go to scholarsvoice.org/navigate, find the pink button and get on the wait list. We open the wait list first. So we take applications from people on the wait list first. They get first crack at a spot in our program, and we will be enrolling in mid-late July. So you're going to want to get on that wait list now. So today's podcast might get a tiny bit ranty just because I feel like so much advice about productivity is like about making you feel bad or about telling you that the way that you're doing it is wrong and that you need to create the right, quote unquote, set of habits or activities or ways of doing things in order for you to get that desired productivity. But the truth is, the more I work with academics and the more coaching that I do, the more I realize, not surprisingly maybe, that everyone is different. And the thought process that says like, oh, I do this bad thing is actually holding you back. And I'm going to explain why. So let me give you an example. This is one that probably runs deep for a lot of us, right? We are told that we shouldn't procrastinate, right? That procrastination is like avoiding the task that you're supposed to be doing. So procrastination can look like, I'm just gonna empty my email inbox instead of writing because the writing task maybe seems a little too hard. So I'm just gonna check some things off my list here by clearing my inbox, right? This is something, or a version of this is something I hear a lot, right? There's a lot of people who say, I need to clear the decks before I can get to writing. And so clear the decks is actually a little bit of like a more positive spin, right? On procrastinating, right? But maybe it's been called procrastinating by other productivity gurus or your advisor or the mean person inside your head that likes to criticize you, right? So I don't think that procrastination is bad. Or let me say this, I don't think that it's helpful for you to think of procrastination or clearing the decks or any of these other kind of things like I need to do XYZ activity before I get to writing. Like, I don't think that you should think of those as bad, especially like with that really negative, naughty connotation. Like, oh, I know it's bad to do this, but I do it anyway. I hear that over and over again from our coaching clients. So I just want to say it is not bad to procrastinate. And when you are when you are procrastinating, or when you are clearing the decks, or when you feel like compelled to do something else before you get to your writing or before you get to some other task at hand, by thinking of it as bad, you're avoiding a really wonderful moment of insight, which is, instead of just labeling the thing bad, asking yourself, why am I doing this? What is the function of procrastination for me? The answer to that question then can get you towards what you might want to change or not change about whatever habit or productivity method or whatever you want to call it, you think you should change. So, for example, if you are of this mind of like, I need to clear the decks before I get to writing, I need to have an inbox at 0, or at least deal with some emails before I get to writing, right? Think about like, well, why is that? What are you avoiding doing by doing the other tasks? Okay. And again, without judgment, like, you're allowed to avoid things. So like, but then you got to ask yourself, what am I gaining from doing the procrastination task? Like, what is it feeding in my brain that it makes me compelled to do that instead of the thing I'm quote unquote avoiding, right? That's really the insight that you need. What is the function of that quote unquote bad habit? And then you can decide, once you've decided on what the function of that is, then you can decide whether you want to continue to do it, which is totally acceptable, depending, on the function, whether you want to put boundaries around it, like a time limit or some kind of boundary so that it stops taking up more time than you want. And basically, you can decide whether it is an integral part of your process, your practice, that you actually need to keep, because people need different things. And there isn't a one size fits all for productivity, right? We can give you advice, we give you examples, we give you things to think about in terms of getting your writing done. But there's no one way that is a cookie cutter going to work for everyone, because we are all so different. So if procrastination is like what you're calling procrastination, right, functions as like a warm-up period for writing, then if that's the purpose, then maybe that's fine, right? Maybe that procrastination serves as a transition between your home life and your work. That's a perfectly reasonable function, right? So really, you got to dig in. What is that quote unquote procrastination or a bad habit activity doing? What's the function? So if you find that, hey, yeah, actually, it's that I need some kind of transition. I can't just get out of my car, sit in my office and start writing, or go to my computer, open up the laptop and start. I need some kind of transition. Then you can just decide okay, do I want to put a boundary around it? Set a timer. The thing is that if something has been, let me say this, your quote unquote bad habits have been serving you. So that's another question to ask. How to interrogate your bad habits. Maybe this podcast episode should have been called. So that's another thing to ask. Is this bad habit serving me? How did it work before? So let's take an example there. So for example, binge and bust style writing, right? So you don't do any writing for a long time, then you've got a deadline coming up or something, and you binge write, right? Everything goes to the side. You stop exercising, you stop eating well, you stop doing everything else, and you just are writing up until a deadline. It can happen with grants. It can happen for many, many different reasons, right? So that binge and bust style. So you need to think well, how did that binge and bust style of writing actually work well for me in the past, right? So maybe you got your PhD done that way. Maybe you were able to do your coursework and write your dissertation because when push came to shove, you could pull it out. Like you could, pull the all-nighter, work up into the deadline and then crash. And that style of working worked well for you. But what happens? At some moment, that bad habit of binge and bust writing stops working. And here's what that might look like. So for example, you might have stayed up late, poured a lot of energy into that writing, been in a bad physical position, so your back might hurt. And so you crash on the other side of the writing in a way that is non-sustainable. It might have been sustainable for you before because you were younger or you were in better shape or you didn't have caretaking responsibilities or something else, right? You might have been able to sustain the binge and bust before because on the bust side, it wasn't that bad, right? There were things that whatever your lifestyle was at that moment or your physical health was at that moment, you could recover from the bust better. But then at some point, what you might see as a bad habit, right? The binge and bust stops working. So understanding that is also something to understand about your quote unquote bad habits is that usually people have habits especially around productivity, let's say, because there was a purpose for them. Something about it worked. So you need to understand what was it about that bad habit that worked before? How did it serve you previously? And then you can decide, right? Okay, well, it's not serving me now because of this reason. So I'm going to thank the bad habit and I'm going to let it go, right? And I'm going to try something new. So all of this is to say that instead of kind of cookie cutter productivity, instead of judgmental productivity advice, instead of self-loathing or self-critique around your productivity and around your habits, instead, what I want you to think about is developing intention and reflection. Okay. So I want you right now, go ahead if you're driving or jogging or whatever, maybe you want to do this a little later, but maybe make a list. What are those quote unquote bad habits that you think you have? These bad habits that are keeping you from getting the writing done and the publications out that you want to get done, or from achieving something that you want to achieve. Make a list of those. And then I want you to ask about each one of those things on the list. What is the purpose of this? What purpose does it serve for me? And then I want you to ask, how did this work out really great for me before? When in my life was there a big benefit to doing things this way? So that you're clear on that. Because you do need to be clear whether you actually want to change those things or not. So that's another question maybe. How is this way of doing it no longer serving me? When you're clear on all those three questions, then think about how do you want to move forward with intention? And I'm going to give you a little advice around kind of how to change, especially a writing habit, but really any kind of productivity habit, or if you want to make a productivity change or a workflow change. This is my advice about doing it. First, I would be careful about making huge sweeping changes where you just go and change everything. And then, that you do too many changes at one time. So instead, I would select one thing to change. So for example, with procrastinating, maybe what you want to do is, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes. And when it goes off, I'm going to stop doing my procrastinating activity and I'm going to get to the thing that I originally wanted to get to. Now, that's just one, a small tweak. You're not changing everything about everything. You're just changing that one thing. Then the next step is the accompanying step is to, when you implement a change like that, implement it for some amount of time. Don't just do it once. And then when it doesn't work, say that didn't work, you got to try things for enough time that they could get a little sticky. So try it for a week, try it for 2 weeks. And as you're trying it, I want you to be reflective, okay? I want you to keep a little journal or something nearby where you can write down, like, how is this working today? So for example, the procrastination thing, your timer goes off. You might just take a little note that says, oh, it was really hard to pull myself, like to listen to the timer and stop today. And then by being reflective, then you are going to be able to note whether that gets better as the trial period goes on. And if you do that with all the different layers or like multiple layers of quote unquote bad habits, then you're going to be you're taking on change in this intentional way. And you're making sure that your changes are like really need to be changed. Like some people are like, oh, I need to read a lot before I can start writing. And sometimes I'm like, yeah. And like, what's wrong with that? Well, if the person kind of identifies that that's a way they avoid writing, then we can start to talk about putting a boundary on that or working on some mindset around how quote unquote ready you need to be in order to actually sit down and write. But if it's not, if it's just like, this is part of my process, then let it be part of your process. The important thing is to be intentional and reflective, right? Really use reflection as a tool. I want you to think about these habit changes as gentle, like as upgrades instead of as like, I'm going to sweep the table and I'm going to do something totally different now. No, honor what works for you, honor what has worked for you in the past, and be intentional, and be intentional about what you want to change into the future. So that is my advice for all of you out there thinking you have bad habits and telling yourself that you are bad for doing certain things. No, those habits that you have them for a reason. What's the reason? They served you. How did they serve you? And then how are they not serving you now? Maybe they still are, and it's fine, and you can keep them. And if they're not, being intentional and reflective about change. Thank you so much for listening today, and have a great day. Bye. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.